Okay, well, thanks for the introduction. The subject of my presentation is completely different to the previous two, so please bear with me. If you don't understand anything, you are very welcome to interrupt and ask. It's not a particularly technical presentation, so I'm mostly interested in telling you about my project, and hopefully I will be able to spark off the discussion. So, my name is Marco. I work for the University of Plymouth in England. Giovanni is with us today as well. He's sitting over there. And Giovanni and I produced this work together in collaboration with a group of students who at the time were part of the University of Plymouth. Our work is funded by Interreg, and we work in collaboration with Plymouth Community Homes. The title of the paper is The Mood of the Silver Economy. So just to make sure that we are all on the same page, I would like to start by providing you with the definition of silver economy. Right, so, well, the silver economy is a concept that refers to all the economic activities, products, and services that were designed to meet the needs of older adults. The term actually comes from the concept of silver market, which was created in Japan in the 70s. Japan used to be the country with the largest percentage of population over 65 in the 70s. Nowadays, when we talk about older adults, we are not referring exclusively to people over 65. There is plenty of recent work on the silver economy that is including people who are younger than 65. However, these people are typically those who suffer chronic illnesses or have some form of mobility impairments. Therefore, they require special care. Therefore, they are included in the silver economy, even if they are younger than 65. Regardless of the number, regardless of the age that we choose to be the limit for the silver economy, the truth is that older adults represent a unique challenge for the society in terms of health and well-being. And this challenge has to be addressed in the near future. Giovanni and I are part of a project that is trying to address this challenge. We are part of the Age Independent project. Normally we use the short name Age-In. Age-In consists of 14 different institutions spread across France, the United Kingdom, Belgium, and the Netherlands. The goal of Age-In is to improve the quality of life of older adults while helping them to stay at home for longer. There is plenty of research that shows that people who have to leave their homes to move to a nursing facility or an assisted living facility will experience depression. And then depression will bring other illnesses or will complicate existing illnesses. And that's what we are trying to avoid by helping people to stay at home for longer. There are two main branches of the Age-In project. One is to do with housing adaptation. The other one is to do with the prevention of isolation. In terms of housing adaptations, there are flats, apartments that have been refurbished in Belgium and France and have been adapted specifically for older adults. These flats, these apartments include not only furniture that is suitable and convenient for the use of elderly people, but also there is suitable technology in these places to help people to stay in touch and communicate with relatives and other people. At the University of Plymouth, we are mostly interested in evaluating the interaction between the elderly population and social robots. So just to give you an example, we took Stevie, which is the robot in the picture, and we took it to a dementia center in Camborne, and the people in the dementia center were able to interact with the robot. Recently as a few days ago, we published a report that describes the results of a pilot study that we carried out to estimate how much elderly people trust in a social robot. But precisely in preparation for this pilot study, we had to carry out focus groups. The focus groups took place a year ago, and we invited some elderly people who live in the city of Plymouth to come to the university and have conversations with us. In these conversations, we spoke mostly about housing adaptation, independent living, isolation, and their concerns about technology. Obviously, given the nature of these focus groups, we had to apply for ethical approval before we were able to invite people to come. But once we got ethical approval, we invited people, they came to the university, we had the conversations with them, we were able to record the conversations, and then we used software to get transcriptions from those conversations. In the transcriptions, we remove all the words that were pronounced by people like me and the rest of the staff of the University of Plymouth, and we kept exclusively the words that were said by the older adults. And those words became our data. Now, a year ago when we had the focus groups, I was not expecting to come to this conference. I was not even expecting to produce a paper or a report on the focus groups. However, I have always been interested in words, especially in the way in which we use words to convey our feelings and emotions. I realized that a picture can tell 1,000 words, but no matter how many words you can put together in a single picture, you still need 1 or 2 words to start the conversation. And in the focus groups, that's exactly what I did. I simply started the conversations, and then I let people do the talking. But once I had the transcriptions from the focus groups, I started to count the frequencies of the words that people were using more often. And later, I used TF-IDF to actually identify the most characteristic keywords in the conversations. But initially, I looked only at the frequencies. So what were the most frequently used words? And what I realized is that the youngest people who attended our focus groups were using very specific words to refer to others. For example, they were using words like husband, wife, children, sister. Those were the words that they were using to refer to their relatives and other people in general. However, the oldest people in our focus groups, the eldest people, were no longer using those words. When they wanted to refer to other people, they used words like somebody, anybody, everybody. And that made their conversations particularly impersonal. And that was the moment when I decided that I had to write about this. Exactly at the time in which I got the transcriptions from the focus groups, I was working in parallel on a completely separate study. You may know that in the United Kingdom, During the first lockdown, the Prime Minister gave a briefing about COVID every day in the afternoon. And what we were doing was monitoring Twitter exactly at the time the Prime Minister was talking and was providing his briefing. And we collected a number of tweets. And then we used a classifier to identify the emotions expressed on the tweets that people were producing at the same time the Prime Minister was giving his briefing. We used a well-known classifier. This is text to emotion. It's freely available and it's very easy to use. According to that classifier, fear was the most prominent emotion expressed in the tweets about COVID in 2020. These are tweets published in the United Kingdom in relation to the Prime Minister briefings. And at the time, I thought that it was very sensible to use exactly the same classifier to analyze the transcriptions of the focus groups that we had carried out. So I took exactly the same classifier and I look into the possibility of analyzing or identifying the emotions expressed in the focus groups. And just to give you an example, here I have the results for focus group 1. And once again, I had fear as the most prominent emotion expressed by the people in this focus group. The first focus group was composed by those who have multiple chronic illnesses, and most of them also had mobility impairments. So we are talking about people who had to be on a wheelchair for most of the time, or people who were using prosthetic legs. So they are no longer independent. And maybe that is the reason why fear and sadness was particularly high in the conversations that we had with them. And then I took these to Plymouth Community Homes, and they are an organization who are working with the elderly population in Plymouth. And when I spoke with the representative from Plymouth Community Homes, she was not very keen on my work. She was not particularly interested in these results. And the reason is she explained to me that older adults normally have a much wider range of emotions than the 5 emotions that this classifier can identify. So normally it's not just surprise, anger, sadness, fear, and happiness, but there are other emotions, other feelings that they also convey often. So they said if you want to use a classifier, you need to extend your current classifier and consider other feelings, other emotions. And in particular, I just started to hear about depression. Depression is commonly associated with the aging population. So at meetings with Plymouth Community Homes, they said if you want to have a classifier, you need a classifier capable of identifying depression. In the United Kingdom, the Royal Society for Public Health estimates that 1 in 4 people between 18 and 34 consider depression to be normal in old age. Of course, that's wrong. Of course, that doesn't have to be the case. Obviously, elderly people can be happy as well, but, well, this is the perception. So at the time, the next step in my work was to look for a classifier that was able to identify depression. The one thing that I had to start with was to understand what exactly depression is. And according to the literature, depression is not an emotion, but it's actually a mood. Moods are less intense than emotions, but they last longer than emotions. So at that point, I realized the classifier I was looking for had to be different to what I was using. I could not use something as standard as text to emotion. I had to look for something else. There is one classifier that has been implemented, that has been used in studies involving computing, and that one is the POMS classifier. And it's mostly a classifier that has been used in sports sciences. So when athletes have to compete, psychologists or sports psychologists will check their mood before the competition. And then in principle, if they have a lot of vigor, then they are likely to perform well. The less fatigue, the less depression they have, the better results they will achieve in the end. And so what we did was to implement the POMS classifier. This one considered 7 moods, but for our work, we restricted the classification to only 6. We removed the friendliness. So these are the 6 moods that we consider in our study. And now, going back to focus group 1, what we have is a great deal of depression. And after depression, what we have is anger. Well, those were the results. Obviously, in a case like this, the question is, or one of the many questions is whether the classifier is actually performing well. To the best of our knowledge, there is no annotated training collection that is going to help us to work specifically with the elderly population. So either we build our own benchmark or we use something else. For this particular study, what we employed was a large collection of tweets. And we use tweets to train the classifier and then eventually analyze the transcriptions we had from the focus groups. I decided to choose exclusively focus group 1 for this presentation because it's the one where we had the most clear results in terms of the emotions and moods that we identified. I'm getting very close to 20 minutes, so I think it's probably best if I stop here. So just to show you some conclusions, in this work we have applied machine learning to analyze conversations recorded with older adults. And we are hoping that the insights that we have been able to gather can help later in terms of decision making regarding the health and well-being of the aging population. That's it.
Thank you very much.
Very interesting work, because I'm also getting the analysis of solar, whatever, like a fish or whatever. The interesting thing, if you go to slide with your moods, so the only, apart from vigor, the only negative moods there. And to me, what I would really like to see is like a happiness one. So, where the positive moods in your soul, because obviously for sports people, performance, they want to see what pulls them back. But if you want to improve the happiness and the well-being, of older people, then you need positive moods just as much as the negative ones.
Yes, completely agree with you. I think one of the problems we have is that the elderly population has not been the case study of much work before, at least work on machine learning or classifiers like this. So we don't have much background on that. We are literally building our own background. So initially, I went with a very standard classifier, and the feedback I received from people who work with older adults was this is not ideal because you are not taking depression into account. When I proposed this one thing that they actually like is that they said fatigue is another one of the moods that are very often observed in older adults. So they said they normally are tired or have some experience of tiredness. So when they saw that one or this one, they said, well, this might work in principle. And in the publication, what we actually attempted to do was to combine explanations or to provide explanation combining the results of the two classifiers. So this one takes happiness into account, is not particularly high according to this classifier, but at least is higher than anger, for example. So I think it's just, in our case, it's just a matter of keep working and then perhaps building a benchmark eventually or finding another suitable classifier to use both. In psychology, there are two models that have been used, one by Ekman and one by Plotchik. Plotchik seems to be very good, but the range of emotions in Plotchik is really wide. And because we don't have any training data, then using that model is likely to fail simply because we don't have enough to train the machine in the use of that one. But well, we are working on that, so maybe later we can produce other results.
For us information systems people, it's also very interesting. What I like about this focus on depression is it looks beyond just the physical, how can you physically assist the elderly, but, you will not be able to have a nice bed and then be depressed. I mean, what quality of life does that give them? But what I was wondering if, for the research, what I would like to see is how do you get rid of that depression? I mean, what are those other bars, that if they go higher, the depression will go lower? Is it the sense of belonging? Is it the sense of agency? Things like that. It would actually be nice to see that being added to those, because I think that, as you said, that the elderly is different from that.
So in the paper, we offer more details on some of these issues. For example, one of the things that we attempted to do in the paper was to look at gender and see if we were able to identify differences in gender. Well, as you can see in these histograms, the difference is so minimal that we are not sure that they are actually significant. They might happen just by chance. But by reviewing the transcriptions in the paper, we provided some explanations because it looked like men were a little more depressed than women. So in the paper, we look into research about that situation. What we found is, for example, it seems that women are much better at keeping networks of people than men. So if a man loses his wife, then he not only loses the companion, but he actually loses the main link to the rest of his network. And that normally leads to higher depression, higher isolation. And that is what we can confirm from the conversations we had with the older adults. So it looks like that. It's easier for a man to become isolated in society in older age. But also, this might be the case of Western societies. We don't know what would be the case somewhere else. But yes, we attempted to look at an explanation of why depression is that high, why anger is that high. So for anger, for example, we think the issue of or mobility issues are very important cause of the anger they may have, the realization that they no longer can be on their own, that they need someone to help permanently. That seems to be a very major source of anger in this population.
Yes, so your results here, they look mostly okay. Depression, anger, confusion, that all checks out. So curious about this small percentage of fatigue.
Well, that is something that I was not able to explain either, especially after the conversation with Plymouth Community Homes, because they said the one thing we like about the model is the inclusion of depression and fatigue, because in their experience, those two moods are often present. Not in focus group 1, but focus group 2 seem to have the youngest group of people in the focus groups. And sorry, not the youngest, but the one with the smallest amount of chronic illnesses. So are people who are not very young, but they don't have major health issues. And because of that, then they tend to volunteer in a lot of activities that are organized by communities like Plymouth Community Homes. So they volunteer to help other older adults. They volunteer to work in churches, or they attend organized activities like Tai Chi, dancing, and things like that. So maybe because of that, in the particular case of that focus group, fatigue was not so high, because these are people that remain active. So they are not very young, but because they are not unwell or not too unwell, then they are still able to be active. And maybe that would be the reason why fatigue was not that high. But I'm talking about a different focus groups. In the case of focus group 1, perhaps the only thing that I could say is depression, anger, and confusion was so high that basically took the whole amount of emotion in this case.
Because I have a different thought about this. Because how do you detect fatigue in a speech? Basically, if the person tells you that he's tired, she's tired, well, that's okay. But what other words? Because we're using transcripts, not actual voice.
Yes.
Most of the time, we tend to detect fatigue by listening to the person's voice. So it sounds.
So Holmes defines a collection of 65 adjectives, and there is a particular set of adjectives associated with each of the moods. So basically what the classifier is looking for is words that can be linked to those adjectives. But, well, there are a few related to fatigue and then a few related to depression and so on. The reason why we remove friendliness, for example, is because the adjectives in that collection were not very present in the transcriptions, and they don't seem to be particularly indicative of friendliness, so we actually removed that category. But yes, so that's in principle that's how we are looking for. If we were not working on transcriptions, but if we were working with tweets, then perhaps we could use hashtags. I don't know, hashtag depression, hashtag fatigue, something like that. It doesn't always work. In Twitter, the main issue is there is plenty of irony, there is plenty of sarcasm. So sometimes they can say something in one direction, but at the end of the tweet, they put a smiley face, and then that reverses completely the meaning of the sentence. So, well, the answer to your question is we are using adjectives for each of the categories, but I agree. So, Ekman, for example, which is one of the other classifiers used in psychology, what they look is at facial expressions, so not only the voice in a speech, but facial expressions. But at this point, we didn't have the technology to capture movement or facial expressions, so we just went for words.
Yeah. Future war.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, please.
Just to make sure, are all these charts related to those COVID broadcasters you mentioned? Is it the same experiment?
So not in this paper, because this paper was dedicated to the elderly population, but this is separate work that we were carrying out in parallel. I mean, the things that I can tell you is we had a collection of tweets from 2020, and then another collection of tweets from 2022. So we got tweets from the first lockdown, and then tweets from the present day. And the idea, or what I was hoping to see, is that fear was no longer the most prominent emotion. I thought that nowadays probably anger or sadness would be more prominent than fear. But what I have found so far is that fear remains.
Yeah, sure. Would you like to recall your role? We will participate. Don't appear as a child.
No.
But you can probably remember how you will describe your own emotions in those categories.
Yes. So
Does it look similar?
I think the one thing about this one is we collected these tweets before there was a vaccine. So this was the first lockdown. There wasn't a vaccine for COVID at the time. So the vaccine came months later. So at this time, there was not even the plan or the idea that, okay, so we are going to get vaccinated, so maybe things are going to get better. At that time, there's not even a vaccine, so just let's hope for the best. And maybe that could be another reason why fear was so prominent.
Well, I'm trying to.
Yes,
So one comment and one suggestion. So one comment is that, as you point out, I think earlier, it's not so much the absolute level of fear or whatever it is, but it's the differential analysis, like between genders or between focus group 1, 2, and 3, and see which one is higher, or between site 1 and site 2 in different places. So that differential analysis, I think, is much more important than the absolute level of fear or anger or whatever it is. I have one friend, and I think you know him, Marcus, and he also does natural language processing on. So as you know, the problem with psychologists is if you give the transcript of this focus group to 3 psychologists and you ask them to rate it under how the question, so there will be a lot of disagreement. So I believe the psychological scales are very immature and each model is very different. So he's trying to develop natural language processing for that. Another psychological model, also proprietary psychologist, Tirotto, someone to do natural language processing on SEM transcripts that they're also trying to classify and use in that one. And so he's got to deal with also the lack of data that you have of properly classified groups to train your classifier on. Now, what he's done is actually tried to use GPT-3 to generate additional texts of the already pre-existing transcripts. And so he's CP3 to generate additional, like he notes that, like all the psychologists have rated this one as a repressive one. So then GPT-3 creates additional transcript based on that one. And then he looks those as an extension of his domain of already classified documents. So far, results are so certain, but this is another possible thing to try, and those we going to try and see if it works. The psychology is.
Yes, and in the previous general election in the UK, Giovanni and I also collected tweets and ran the analysis of sentiment. But at the time when we talk about sentiment, we were only talking about polarity, so positive, negative, and neutral. And what we found is if we use one classifier, sentiment 140, then most of the tweets were neutral. If we used another classifier, senti strength, most of the tweets were negative. If we used another classifier, most of the tweets were positive. So it was very clear that we could well, the results could be completely biased based on the classifier that we were using to look for or to identify the polarity of the tweets. And in principle, that's the main worry with this. So what we want is to make sure that the classifier somehow is giving sensible results.
Well, it's reliable.
Exactly.
Yeah, so thank you very much.